Welcome to our podcast, Fear Less, Do More. Here we're going to take a deep dive into the minds of some really daring, impactful change makers. I'm your host, Gill Hunter, and I'm the managing partner at Square One Law. In each episode, we're going to meet some innovators, some trailblazers, and we're going to talk about their successes, their fears, their challenges, and their lived experiences. We're going to understand their secrets to their resilience and their source of their passion, so that we can understand what drives them to achieve. These are all leaders who inspire us to step out of our own comfort zones and fear less, do more. Hi, and welcome to this episode of our podcast, Fear Less, Do More. Today, I'm joined by Major Karen Thomson, who's the Communities and Engagement Officer in the British Army. Karen, welcome.
Thanks very much, Jill. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. It's great to talk to somebody who has got a completely different life experience and background to me. You've had a long career in the Army. There must be, what first attracted you to that as a career?
Wow, okay. So I have had a long career in the Army, Jill. I joined at the very tender age of 16 years old. And I'm now 48, so there we go, sort of 32 years essentially. I've done a variety of jobs during that time, and I've had a variety of different levels of service, different sort of terms and conditions essentially within the Army. What attracted me? I've got to say I come from a family that has a very strong military background, and as I was finishing school, I realised that quite truthfully, I felt as if I'd had enough of my academic education. And I was working, I'd always worked growing up in Barnard Castle. I worked in the baker's oven, which was a wonderful tea shop. I worked in Mennel's pet shop as well on the bank. That's not there now, unfortunately. But I knew that what I didn't want to do was the same thing every single day for the rest of my life. And I've got to say that I haven't been disappointed. And no 2 days in that 32-year period have ever been the same.
So over that 32 period, there must be some real sort of career highlights. What have they been for you?
Yeah, so I think when I first joined, I had the opportunity and I saw an advert in the Northern Echo, and it was for Army apprentices, and it was in 1991. Now, it was a really important time for me. I was 16 years old. I knew I didn't want to do the same thing, but I knew I didn't want to go back to school. So I was looking for opportunities then. And interestingly, Jill, you'd be surprised, I always wanted to be a solicitor, actually.
You made the right choice.
I was originally planning on going back to doing A-levels, and then I realised, no, I just didn't want to do the same thing, and I wanted to do something different. So I realised that I could go and have this opportunity. And the advert that I saw in the Northern Echo was looking for Army apprentices, essentially. And the Army has an apprentices college, and it's in Harrogate. It was one of 3 apprentices colleges at the time for the Royal Engineers, the REME, the Royal Electrical and Mechanical Engineers, and also the Royal Signals as well. So I thought, great, Harrogate, it's only just down the road. And so I woke up one morning, I got on a bus from Barnard Castle to Darlington. I walked into the Army Careers Office, and I said, I'd like to join the Army. And they said, what would you like to do? I said, I haven't got a clue. So I sat down with somebody and they talked me through the jobs that were available. You did essentially an aptitude test. And then the list of jobs came off, and it was a case of, right, which one of these do you want to do? So at the time, the Army had a lot of jobs. Currently, there are over 200 roles in the British Army. So that's quite a lot more, I think, than people often appreciate. And I was a little bit driven at the time, and I said, which one pays the most? And they told me that the job that paid the most at the time was a telecommunications operator linguist. Ooh. So that was languages. And I'd done French and German very poorly at school. However, I thought, well, why not? Why not give it a try? So I said, yeah, I'll sign up for that one. And that is exactly what I did. So going to Harrogate was without a doubt life-changing for me. Real set of life skills that I got at a very early age that I really don't think I would have ever got anywhere else. Opportunities for travel, opportunities to do sport that I wouldn't have ever done anywhere else. And, trips abroad, I went to Gibraltar, I went to Nepal, which was just amazing.
My favourite place in the world. Nepal.
Wow. I'd like to go back actually, but I've only ever been the once. But it was just so memorable, so memorable.
So as a 16-year-old, that must have been quite a shock to the system. What did you learn about yourself in that first 2 years?
Wow. I learned that I am absolutely human and I will get homesick. And despite the fact that I was desperate to leave home, I still got homesick. I realised that very often, you are a product of the environment in which you come from or, where you're brought up. And going to Harrogate and being taken out of my environment and being put into that environment with other people, you very quickly become self-reliant. I didn't know anybody else when I went there, but nor did anybody else actually. And you very quickly learn about that team and you very quickly learn about people's strengths and people's weaknesses. In terms of what I learned about myself, I had so many opportunities to be able to go forward and give things a go. And we were really encouraged to try different things. And I've always been, it's quite funny, when I was growing up, I always tried lots of different things, guides and crusaders and running and so on and so forth. And I was a bit of a dabbler, quite truthfully. And, I like to sort of dip in and out lots of things. And I made the most of that when I went to Harrogate. So one of the things that we used to have to do was we used to have to choose an activity, like a hobby, essentially. And the one I chose was always a bit sort of, wow, I've never done that before. I'll give it a go. Subaqua diving. Okay, so
easy to get into.
Absolutely,
that, yeah.
And when had I ever had the opportunity to do subaqua diving before? And the reason that I chose it was a little bit odd. I'd also had a bit of a fear of water. And I thought, well, actually, subaqua diving, I could just try it and just sort of see how far I can get with it, and just knowing that I'd be gradually introduced to it and have the opportunity to do that. So that was, I suppose, the first thing that I learned was probably the fact that actually given the opportunity, and, I heard a wonderful thing the other day. Somebody said, talent is everywhere, but opportunity isn't. And I think that's really important. I think that's really important when we think about the aspirations of young people now. Everyone is born with a talent. You've just got to find it. You've just got to have the opportunity and match those things up. So I was really lucky. I was given that opportunity. So I took it and off I went doing my subaqua diving. The other thing that I really learned about myself was resilience, was starting to be really resilient. So the trip I mentioned about going to Nepal.
Yeah.
So I joined Harrogate in the October and a message came out, I suppose it must have been about the November, that if you wanted to go to Nepal, you could, there was a selection process basically. It was a whitewater rafting trip. And I thought, yeah, I quite like the sound of that. And trekking in the foothills of the Himalayas. And I thought, yeah, I really like the sound of that. So there were a lot of us that applied, no surprises there. And they asked us to climb to the top of a trainasium, which is a very, very big structure. Bearing in mind this was 1991, and I'm not quite sure we had full grasp of the working at height regulations then. But essentially, we climbed to the top of the trainasium, and it was just a display of would you be the sort of person who could actually overcome fear. And the trip was a whitewater rafting expedition down the Sunkoshi River, which I think is about 240 kilometres, runs west to east through Nepal. And obviously you'd be required to negotiate rapids and then do some trekking in the foothills of the Himalayas. So yeah, so I think the resilience element, doing the training, I probably had my first near-death experience, whitewater rafting in the Nottingham Water Sports Centre, which was quite interesting. That was part of the training.
The epicentre of peril.
Yeah, absolutely. I also went on Blue Peter because we were the youngest group of people ever to do whitewater rafting. So it was a group of 16, 17-year-olds, which was amazing. So yeah, resilience, I would say, was probably the second thing that I learned about myself. And I think the third thing I learned was, again, sort of, going back to us being a product of our own environment, is the fact that the world is a very big, very wonderful, very cultural, very, very diverse place. And actually, you really have to understand it, and you have to not live in your own little bubble. I remember when we were out in Nepal, I remember seeing some cremations by the side of the Bagmati River, and essentially, you know, how the Nepalese would deal with their, you know, their relationship, their family who had passed was completely different to what I had seen in the Western world. And that really opened up my eyes, quite truthfully, about, you know, how different cultures will deal with that and, you know, deal with matters of life and matters of death. So I think it made me realise, I guess, how small my own experience had been. And at an early age, I realised that I wanted to go out there and see a lot more.
You talked about, you know, being in a bubble. I think there's probably quite a misconception that actually if you are in the army, you are in a bubble and that bubble just moves around to different places but stays very insular within itself. But what you described there is you getting far more involved and exposed to the communities that you're in.
Yeah.
Is that right? And are there other things that were misconceptions that you might have had or that other people have had about the army that you think actually the experience is very different to what people think it is?
So I think, with the first sort of question about, you know, the sort of, you know, the army being quite insular, I think, you know, the army will operate on a very good, solid set of principles, quite truthfully. And I think they are fabulous principles. We call them our values and standards for the British Army. But quite truthfully, if I wasn't even in the army, I would operate my life under those principles anyway. So those values and standards. So essentially we have, they are courage, they are discipline, they are respect for others, integrity, loyalty, and selfless commitment as well. And those aspects of our values and standards, they basically, you know, take us through absolutely everything. So within the organisation, within the army, everybody is required to operate to those values and standards, essentially. So they are what we will always take with us, and that's wherever we go. I think it's really interesting to think that, you know, the army ultimately is a product of society, and, you know, the army will take what society gives it essentially and then bring those people in and then expect them to work to our values and standards essentially. So that's how it goes. I think that when we go abroad, when we go on operations, it's very important for us to be able to operate with the freedom that we are required to do, and with whatever mission, with whatever mandate the government of the day requires us to deliver. And I think that takes an immense level of understanding. You have to know a country's culture. You have to know the area that you're operating in. You have to know who the change makers are, who the decision makers are. But ultimately, most of all, you have to be able to operate with that level of freedom. And it's society and it's people that will give you that. So very often we will look at, you know, essentially years ago, what used to be called our, you know, hearts and minds, where we would go out and we would interact with communities and we would let them know why we were there. And I've got to say, you know, I've been on multiple operations where the people of that country, so say for example, Bosnia, former Republic of Yugoslavia, I was there in 1995 as a very young soldier, and the people of that country were very, very pleased to see the United Nations. So, you know, very, very welcoming.
Yeah.
And like I say, we work very, very hard to make sure that we are going to be accepted there and to be able to operate with that level of freedom of manoeuvre. In terms of misconceptions, that's a really, really good one. I think a lot of people, when they think about the British Army, you know, the archetypal picture is of a white male infantry soldier. And that's, you know, generally that's about as far as it goes, quite truthfully. The truth is that portion of the British Army is about 30%. The other 70% are the supporting roles that go with that. There's over 200 roles in the British Army, of which, infantry soldier is just one of them.
Yeah.
And, there's, crikey, goodness me, you could be absolutely everything. I don't think we have hairdressers, and I'm pretty sure we don't have nail technicians. But if you wanted to be anything else, there are so many different roles out there. You start to think about, the sort of the medical side, and we're very self-sufficient in what we do in terms of being an organisation as well. So it is just so vast, and I think that's the key misconception that people have. Whether that's been our own marketing, whether that's people's misconception, preconception, I really don't know. But it's really one that we need to work very hard to make people realise that you can even be a solicitor, Jill,
Yes.
in the army. And of course, all of those roles very much are now open to everybody.
Yeah.
Haven't always got it right in the past, but quite truthfully, all of those roles are open to everybody now. And, the army is working to be very diverse, very inclusive, and break down a lot of those barriers. And I'm very proud to say there's no gender pay gap in the army. You know, you can see just from somebody's rank what they get paid, and that doesn't matter. That doesn't matter who they are, essentially. So
I was going to say, there's lots of parallels with business, but there's also lots of things that business can learn from the way that the army is set up. And there's obviously been a big advertising campaign to try and increase the diversity of the people coming into the army. And you, obviously, as a woman coming through the ranks, have been successful in doing that. How easy was that? Because things were very different in the early 90s to what they are now in 2023. So what's that journey been like as a woman in the army?
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? Because of course, we all have our own personal journey. And I think it's perhaps only when you get a little bit older, you sort of look back and examine that, It was when I joined, bearing in mind I was 16 years old, it was 1991, and they just disbanded the Women's Royal Army Corps. So when I actually went for my selection, I went down to Guildford and I saw, the sort of the tail end of that selection process, essentially. But when I joined, we were essentially, I was in the Royal Signals, the Corps were accepting women, and, it was very much a sort of, right, okay, this is just what we'll do. And it was, Jill, truthfully, it was fabulous. It was really very interesting. I mean, we were accommodated, obviously, as females, as you can, imagine, as the right thing to do. But actually, military training was mixed. And I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed working in, essentially mixed troops for us it was, and, for military training. And like everything else in life, you'll have good female soldiers and average female soldiers. In the same way, you'll have good male soldiers and average, and, maybe the odd poor one in there as well. So it didn't feel strange. It didn't feel odd. I went through and I was actually, it's like, what a great opportunity, but I was selected as the best recruit of my intake.
Wow, that's brilliant.
It was great. But Jill, at no point did anybody ever say that was a publicity stunt? It was being done just because she was a female. It was absolutely. And I never ever felt like that. And as I went through, certainly again at Harrogate, they had their own promotion system within the apprentice ranks, and I worked through that. There was one time I didn't get promoted from corporal to sergeant, and I had to work extra hard, it's had this apprentice rank structure. And I was actually selected as the first female apprentice tradeswoman regimental sergeant major when it was the Army Apprentice College Harrogate. So that's the most senior position. I would have been 18 years old. And I remember, there was a lovely piece. There was some nice pieces in the media, some of the big broadsheets as well. And the regular soldier there at the time, the most senior regular soldier, the RSM, was a gentleman, and he was WO1 RSM Keith Roberts. The man, he was from the Welsh Guards, and he'd fought in the Falklands War. And he did a piece to camera at the end of me having taken the graduation parade at Harrogate. And he was just so complimentary about what I'd achieved. And it was based on my achievements. There was no mention of the fact that I was a female who'd done that. It was the fact that I'd done that based on my achievements. So it had never really been, it wasn't something I was Genuinely, I was not aware of it. I just went and I did my thing, and that worked out well. Going to Sandhurst was slightly different again. We were back into female platoons, but all of our military training was done as a female platoon, which was quite different. And I found that a little bit odd. But then coming towards the end of that, of course, if you were performing very well in command appointments, they'd take you out of the female platoon and put you in a male platoon to deliver those things and deliver them effectively. So as far as I know, I believe it is mixed now. Yeah.
Right, I was going to ask.
I think for that military training. So a lot more integrated.
And then along the way, you got married, had a family.
I did.
How did that pan out then?
Yeah. How did that work? Yeah. How did that work? That was quite interesting. Bit of a Royal Military Academy Sandhurst love story, which was great. That's where I met my husband, Rob. He was an officer cadet at the time. I'm pleased to say we are still married, and it was 21 years back in the middle of August. So I'm absolutely thrilled with that. Thank you. It's quite an achievement this day and age, really. So one I am very proud of. And I met Rob, we got married, and I remember we talked long and hard about having children, even back then, about the pros and cons of that. And we decided that yes, we would go ahead and we would have children. And I remember we hadn't really probably done the proper discussion about careers and everything. It was just about the decision to have kids, which was great. And I remember being about 5 months pregnant and sitting on the sofa in Colchester in a married quarter and saying to Rob, do you know, I'm not sure I want to leave the army when I have, our child. And he said, oh, thank goodness for that. He said, I can't wait to leave. So that was the decision that was made then, really. So I had my daughter, and we had our daughter, Megan, in 2004. And I had a year's maternity leave, and it tied in really nicely with Rob then finishing the army. What I wasn't quite expecting was that after I'd had my year's maternity leave, I went back to work in the March, and I'd probably been back maybe about 6 weeks, and they said, oh, pack your kit, you're going off to Iraq. So that would have been 2004 she was born, so this was 2005, so it was in the August. And it was Optelic 6 out to Iraq. So I was based at 14 Signal Regiment at the time, so it's the UK's only electronic warfare regiment. And I was in the post of Squadron 2IC, so UK based, you probably got about 145 people within the squadron. The post hadn't had anyone there for a long time, so I'd gone into it and I thought, this is really good, I can really start to do all that work. And then I was responsible for taking just a small team, really, about 18 people to Iraq, but obviously on the back of my maternity leave. So that was a bit of a shock to the system. Probably the hardest thing I've ever had to do.
Was that because it was emotionally hard to leave your child, or was it physically hard because you've been out of practice? I mean, what made it hard?
All of the above.
Right.
So, sort of coming back to work, I think having had a child, I don't think that, perhaps things are a little bit different. I'd always worked hard. I'd always sort of tried to keep myself fit. Hadn't quite sort of prepared myself for the fact that I would go and try and do a sit-up and my abdominal muscles were just not going to work the same way that they'd worked before. So that was a bit of a shock. So I sort of wanted a little bit of time for that. Physically, again, I'd always sort of tried to keep myself fit, and that was good. Of course, from an operational perspective, I suppose going on ops after you've had a child is good because you're used to not having much sleep in the first place. On a personal level, that was the most difficult thing, really. But then I look back now and, at the time, it's so difficult. And we made arrangements with Rob. He did an absolutely brilliant job of looking after Meg. And, I don't want to think about it too hard because I know I will get emotional, but he did an absolutely superb job. He was a wonderful father then, and he is still a wonderful father now. And, my husband and my daughter have a brilliant relationship. He took on that task, I'm assuming that he, I know he was emotional, but actually he was able to override that with a level of, sort of being a professional father, knowing that that is exactly what he had to do. And he worked as well, he was self-employed at the time, which was good because it would work around it. For me, it was real extremes of time, quite truthfully, because on a personal level, was the hardest thing I'd ever done. To have your child, to be trying to create that bond, and then to know that you are going away. That was very, very difficult. On a professional level, the job was the best job that I'd ever done. It was absolutely superb. I was doing liaison officer work. I worked in the National Intelligence Cell. It was absolutely amazing. And of course, the overriding piece for that was that ultimately I was a captain in the Royal Signals in the British Army, deploying to an operational theatre, and I was responsible for 18 other people. What comes through then is you realise, again, back to our values and standards, that is very much, your selfless commitment.
Yeah.
I knew how I felt, I acknowledged how I felt, but I also knew that I had to deal with that to deliver what I needed to deliver for the country, for the British Army, for my corps, for my task, for my team was really, really important. So, very interesting times, Jill. Very interesting times. But we all came back safely.
Yes.
So my team came back.
And your daughter is now in the Navy.
She certainly is. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, very, very. There's a real sort of proud mum moment here, and to my daughter. I hope you watch this, and I hope you really understand how proud I am of you. She's done an amazing job. She really has. She joined during COVID, and that was quite tricky. So she joined phase 1. She got COVID. She was isolated because of COVID. It sort of got extended quite a long time. But she's joined as a weapons engineer. So she's had a wonderful 3-month cruise, operational deployment to the Mediterranean already. She did that between August and December last year. And she's just recently come back from the Baltics. And she's about to go on her promotion course and hopefully go off and enjoy a life in the Royal Navy and probably see about 100 times more countries than I will have ever been to. So very, very proud of what she's done. So here's to strong women.
Yeah, absolutely.
What is it they say? May we know them, may we be them, and may we raise them. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Does any part of you think, oh, I wish you weren't doing that?
No, Jill, no, not at all. Again, understanding and knowing the opportunities that she will have. Of course, I look at it from a slightly different perspective than what she does. I think that it doesn't matter where we go in life, whatever our job is, you have to realise that you will have your profession, you have your career, and depending on, I say depending, no, actually, it doesn't matter wherever you go, that should be your, that is your job, that is your profession, and you have a duty to yourself to make sure that you do that and you do it very, very well. But of course, we also, and it's only something that I've been developing, I think a little bit later in my life, is you realise that actually you have a duty to yourself as well for your own personal development. So I remember saying right at the start, I sort of wanted to stop my formal education and, what a fool was I to think that when you go into, the workplace, that your formal education, my education hasn't stopped. And actually it's been something that once that penny drops, once you realise you've got to keep going with it, then actually you embrace that.
One of the values you've talked about is courage, and we talk about fearlessness, which is where the name of this podcast came from. And we talk about what fearlessness means for us, and people don't necessarily associate fearlessness with lawyers who tend to be very risk averse and very cautious. And when we talk about fearlessness, we don't mean that people will go and do really dangerous things just for the sake of it. No. It might be for somebody that they really struggle with making a phone call rather than emailing somebody, and they need to be fearless and think, no, actually I can have a one-to-one conversation with people. So it could be a whole range of things. Fearlessness in the context of what you do I would imagine has a very different context, a different feel to it. What does being fearlessness and having courage mean for you?
So I think, with the courage aspect, we very much look at it in terms of physical courage and, mental courage as well. And that sort of level of strength, you really don't know how strong you can be until you put it to test, quite truthfully. And I think very often what I've always loved about what we do is the fact that it's a slow build. We always have a sort of a way that we will teach people where it's, you'll explain something, you'll demonstrate it, then you'll imitate it, and then you'll practice it. So there's always a sort of a long lead up into the sort of the training aspect. So actually, you wouldn't necessarily ask somebody to be immediately courageous. But of course, what we will do is we'll give people the tools to enable them to do that. And of course, through things, we call it adventurous training, it's essentially outdoor pursuits. But we ask people to basically put themselves into situations where you wouldn't necessarily feel comfortable. So say, for example, whitewater rafting, sub-aqua diving. And in terms of adventurous training, we use that as a vehicle to enable people to safely put themselves outside of their comfort zone so that they then can start to achieve. And I think, and that is actually, that is something that is a requirement. We require all of our soldiers and all of our officers to do a basic level of that. So there are always plenty of opportunities to take yourself outside of your comfort zone. And there are always plenty of other people around who will encourage you. Not, how can I put it, sort of like not deliberately to sort of turn around and say, come on, Jill, it's time you took yourself out of your comfort zone today. But when you are with the right people and the right tribe, and I can't remember who it is that said, but you become the sum total of the 5 people that you spend most of your time with. Yeah. If you're with like-minded people, and of course you get the opportunity to go and see people being courageous and doing different things and breaking the mold. And, we've got some really, really exciting things happening at the moment. I mean, we've got some women in the army who are doing amazing things, who are stepping forward, stepping up to the plate and really breaking the mold there. So, that's really exciting to see, really, really exciting to see, female commandos, females who've passed parachute regiment selection. I think Kat Matthews has just won an amazing medal in the triathlon, absolutely superb. Really, really going forward. So being really courageous like that.
And really good role models for people like your daughter who are coming through into the armed forces.
Absolutely amazing. Absolutely amazing. Just realising that, perhaps now that some of those obstacles have been removed, actually, that will start. And, I think one of the saddest things is that we don't have enough females in the armed forces across the board. Bearing in mind, I think the population 51% female. Whilst I don't think we'll ever get up to 51% in the armed forces, it really should be a lot better than it is. And I would encourage any young woman, I said young woman or woman who's within the age limits, absolutely, to go and to give it a go, because the skill set that you get is just amazing.
So outside of your day job, what do you like to do? What do you do to chill out and relax after you've done all of this adventure?
Wow,
and
gosh, yeah. Do you know, Jill, so this is really getting quite exciting now, because I guess, I don't know, maybe I am now a middle-aged woman and I am menopausal. It started at the start of COVID. I was absolutely convinced I had COVID and realised that you couldn't have COVID for 2 years. That was something else, And it's really made me examine, what is now and what will lie ahead for me in the future. And I was reading the other day, the oldest woman who ever lived was 122 years old.
Wow.
So if I get to live till I'm 122, that's another 74 years. Now, that's a long time, isn't it? So I'm going to try and make the most of that, quite truthfully. So in terms of going forward, I've sort of tried to stop looking at life in blocks, if that makes sense. I've got this big, long stretch, and nobody knows how long they've got, quite truthfully, So what I've realised is that I spent a long time getting to where I am professionally at the moment. my family is complete. I'm not planning on having any more children, and I know my husband certainly isn't, so that's not happening. And I'm actually really excited now, because once I got over the shock of being over 40, I realised that actually, professionally and on a personal level, I probably feel more comfortable with myself now than what I've ever felt. And you realise that actually having the wisdom of those few years that I've had and having the benefits of the experience that I have had means that I really want to take that forward now. And I also feel that, that the world is still my oyster. And even more so because you're taking all of that experience and you perhaps know the pitfalls and you perhaps know that it is about, the sort of slow progress and the chipping away to get to where you want to be. Know a lot more about goal setting and know a lot more about project management. I know a lot more about the fact that I'm not going to suddenly wake up with the extra qualification that I want. I know how much work that's going to take. And that to me is really, really exciting, because what I see in front of me now are actually all the things that I want to do and how I want my life to look. And, some lovely exercises that you can do when you actually start to think to yourself, what would I want my life to look like in 5 years or 10 years or 20 years? And I also think there comes, once you get to a certain level of your career, I think there also comes a time where you want to give back to people. And, I feel really privileged that I've had so many people who have given me their time to help me along the way for absolutely, they don't want anything in return. It is absolutely that altruistic act of being able to help people and to see people grow, and knowing that they might not say thank you tomorrow, they might not say thank you in a month, but actually 3 or 4 months or maybe 3 or 4 years down the line, they might actually write to you and say, thank you. Had it have not been for what you said or what you did for me, there's no way I would have done this now. And that happens, and that is the biggest reward of all, really. So in terms of what do I do, the last sort of couple of years, Jill, I've really started to focus on my own personal development, starting to do a lot more reading, reading some really good books about personal development at the moment, although I realise that you can probably read far too many before you actually just have to get out and start doing it. But in terms of goal setting, that's getting quite exciting now. I really want to buck the trend in terms of, sort of physical fitness. I want to keep going with that. Weight management gets really quite important for women who are sort of,
Tell me
kind
about
of over sort of 40s. Managing the menopause is another thing that we don't talk enough about, quite truthfully. Managing our relationships perhaps with aging parents, and managing illness and, all of these things that quite truthfully are life skills. They really are. But again, until they happen to you, we don't necessarily know how to deal with them. And I guess as a solicitor, you must see a lot of that, about sort of how that happens, where people are almost taken by surprise by.
I think, from my own experience, I think, a lot of people in our age bracket, and I'm a little bit older than you, have that, they're in those sandwich years where you've got children who are still need you in some sense, but you've also got parents who are getting older and they need you in a different way. And if you're a woman, you're dealing usually with menopausal stuff at the same time. So there's a lot of challenges for women of our age. And I think to have those clear goals that you're very focused on, I mean, that's obviously from, your army background enables you to do that very, very easily. And a lot of women don't have the benefit of that knowledge and that skill that you've got. And I think it is really important that we talk about these things and the challenges that women have in later years. And then we keep really talented people working and in business and contributing to society in a way that they can, and they feel that they have that value still. Really
you're
important.
Absolutely right. And it's almost as if, you look at it, you do your academic education, you might do your professional education, but I think there are still so many aspects out there of life that, I remember my kids sort of saying to me, Mum, how does tax work? We do maths at school, but we don't get taught how tax works. Or, I'm quite a brutal parent looking back, I suppose sometimes. I actually did an exercise with them, which was a sort of a reverse engineered, how much money do you actually need to earn? So, we did rent and utility bills and car, the MOT and the servicing. And then, of course, they totaled it up that, they would need to earn £30,000 a year. And I said, now there's this wonderful thing called tax. There's this wonderful thing called national insurance. And, sort of getting them to understand that. And it's almost as if, I was saying about that education. We do professional education, but actually educating yourself on a personal level for the challenges that you will face in life is actually really important. And, of course, the problem is that we generally don't tend to do that until we need it. And the problem with doing that is, you've also got added emotions thrown into there and anything else you might be dealing
very
with.
reactive
So,
at that point.
Yeah, exactly. So I like to prepare, Jill, I've got to be honest. I like to sort of, scan the horizon and look ahead. And I guess that's exactly the same, in business. We look at business resilience, don't we? Yeah. We look at business continuity all of the time. We're constantly looking for those risks to our, to how we operate. And actually, when you think about it, we really ought to probably apply that to our own personal lives as well.
Absolutely.
Take that forward, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I've got one last question for you, which is the question I ask everybody. If, money's no object and you can do what you want, you haven't got any restrictions, what would you now... Our podcast is Fearless, do more. What would you do more of now?
It's a really good question. What would I do more of? Jill, I think I would like to give more of my... I think I'd really like to give more of my time to charity going forwards. Like I said, I think there comes a time where you get sort of a bit more altruistic with what you have with your skill set. I don't have pots and pots of money. If you want to be rich, don't join the army, but you'll have a great lifestyle. I can absolutely promise you that. I think I would want to give more of my time to charity, quite truthfully, and using the skill sets that I've learned to enable other people to, sort of realise. I think sometimes if you don't have that, you can find, people find themselves in some very dark places, perhaps with mental health, perhaps with homelessness, perhaps with abuse. And I just think that actually, to be in such a dark place and perhaps not to be able to see a light at the end of the tunnel must be really, really difficult for people. And I think that actually anyone that can go in and help and who can take the time to help people through that, to help them have hope, and to make them realise that there is something the other side. Because let's be perfectly honest, life is a wonderful, wonderful thing. And every single one of us should be grasping it, and taking it forward and embracing it. Because we only have one life and we absolutely have to make the most of it. So, for those who can't see that, I think, giving them something to be able to say, come on, let's go and do it.
Well, that's a brilliant aspiration, isn't it? To give people hope. And, listening to you today, I have absolutely no doubt that you will smash that like you've smashed everything else in your career.
Sure.
And I look forward to seeing what happens next. Thank you so much. It's been a brilliant insight, into a world that I know only a tiny bit about. And now I realise I know even little less about it than I thought I did. So thank you. That's been really fascinating.
Thanks, Jill.
Thanks very much.
Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. Thank you for listening to Fear Less, Do More. All of our guests come from a diverse range of backgrounds, but they all share a common drive to face their fears, take action, and create meaningful impact. If you've enjoyed this episode of our podcast, please follow us, Square One Law, on Instagram and LinkedIn, and share the content with your friends, family, and networks. Thank you, and see you again on our next episode.